The biting wind stole Ethan's breath as he maneuvered the snowmobile up the final stretch of the slope. January in the Wasatch Back was a merciless teacher, and today's lesson was delivered in sub-zero gusts and the insistent sting of snowflakes against exposed skin. Dispatch had been clipped. Young male, solo skier, caught in a small slide near Ruth's Run. Standard fare for Park City Mountain Rescue. Ethan, however, hadn't felt standard in a long time. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the whisper of wind through the pines and the distant, rhythmic thump of the resort's snowmaking equipment. Below, 3 figures broke the monotonous white, 2 ski patrol, already on scene, and a splash of crimson TV the victim, or what was left of him. Ethan geared up, checking the avalanche beacon clipped to his harness. The probe, the shovel, each movement was precise, economical. Years of training etched into muscle memory. Years spent trying to outrun the ghosts that clawed at the edges of his composure. The snow, surprisingly, wasn't packed down around the body. It was loose, almost powdery, despite 2 days of moderate snowfall, followed by a hard freeze, a peculiar inconsistency. As he skied down the slope, the patrol director, Mark Jensen, met him halfway. Ethan, glad you could make it, young kid, early 20s, didn't stand a chance. Small slide, just enough to bury him. Bad luck. Jensen's face was ruddy, his expression a practiced blend of professional concern and weary resignation. He offered a curt nod towards the body. The victim lay face down, half submerged in the snow. Ethan could see the unnatural angle of a twisted leg. He arrived at the body's side, kneeling carefully. The kid's gear was expensive. Semi-Arc'teryx jacket, top-of-the-line skis, a college student, maybe. He checked for a pulse anyway, a formality, cold, very cold. He began a methodical assessment, ignoring the cameras of the patrol who were documenting the scene. The snow around the body was wrong. Not just the powdery texture, but a lack of the usual debris field. Tongue broken branches, displaced rocks. A small slide wouldn't shave the slope clean like this. It would churn and rip. This looked smoothed over, and then he saw the safety lines. Usually the patrol would use brightly colored webbing to cordon off a scene, marking boundaries for rescue personnel and onlookers. These weren't the standard orange lines. These were thin, black cord, cinder and almost invisible against the snow, and they weren't haphazardly placed. They formed a precise rectangle, carefully encompassing the impact zone, going beyond what would be necessary for a simple avalanche recovery. The lines were tight, almost taut, as if deliberately stretched. A cold knot formed in Ethan's stomach. Something didn't add up. He felt a familiar tremor start in his hands, a phantom ache in his left shoulder. He forced himself to breathe slowly, regulating his pulse. Just breathe, he told himself. It is a ski accident, that is all. But the image flickered in his mind, unbidden. The weight of the snow, the screams swallowed by the avalanche, the empty space where Sarah should have been, the ice cave. That is where it always started. The claustrophobic chill, the dripping water echoing like a death knell, the blinding white of the snow pressing in on all sides. He'd been lead guide on a backcountry tour near Alta 5 years ago. Experienced group, good conditions, a routine run. Then the slab fractured, a clean break, a monstrous roar, and a wave of snow that obliterated everything. He'd managed to trigger his beacon to dig himself out. But Sarah was gone, buried beneath tons of unforgiving ice and snow. The official report blamed unstable snowpack, an act of God. Ethan knew better. He'd seen the pre-existing fracture lines, the warning signs. He'd overruled his instincts, pushed the run because the clients were eager, because the forecast looked marginally acceptable. He'd traded safety for a good time, and Sarah had paid the price. He'd been cleared of any wrongdoing, but the court of his own conscience had delivered a life sentence. He'd spiraled into a darkness that almost consumed him, haunted by nightmares and suffocating guilt. He'd left the guiding service, taken a position with the resort's mountain rescue, hoping the structure and the need to save others could somehow atone for his failure. But the ghosts followed him, whispering accusations with every gust of wind. He shook his head, forcing the memory back into its box. He couldn't afford to dwell. Not now. He needed to focus. "Anything, Ethan?" Jensen asked, his voice sharp, impatient. "Just assessing the scene, Mark," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. "The snowpack is unusual, a bit loose for the conditions, and the safety lines, they're a bit precise, don't you think?" "Usually we use orange webbing," Jensen snorted. "Supply chain issues, Ethan. They're using what they've got. And the snow. We had a localized wind event up here yesterday, scoured the upper layers. It happens. You're reading too much into this." "Maybe," Ethan conceded, but he didn't believe it for a second. "Just seems contained, like someone tried to control the slide rather than isolate the scene." Jensen's jaw tightened. "Look, I appreciate your attention to detail, Ethan. But we've got a body to extract and a report to file. Let's keep it simple, okay? You've been on edge since the incident with Old Man Hemlock last fall. Don't let your demons get the better of you." The reference stung. Hemlock Suppin, a lost hiker Ethan had found after 3 days in the backcountry, half frozen and delirious. He'd initially dismissed Hemlock's rambling story about being intentionally led astray, a deliberate disorientation, but the details, the vagueness, the sheer desperation in Hemlock's eyes, they triggered something in Ethan, stoked the embers of his paranoia. Jensen had sided with the resort's lawyers, chalking it up to a geriatric's confusion and Ethan's overactive imagination. "I'm just doing my job, Mark," Ethan said, his voice clipped. "Exactly. And your job right now is to help me bag this body and move on. We'll let the investigation run its course." Jensen turned towards the ski patrol assisting with the removal. "Let's get this done, people." Ethan knew that the investigation would be cursory at best. The resort didn't want bad press. A tragic skiing accident was far more palatable than the suggestion of foul play. He assisted with the body recovery, his movements mechanical throughout the process. He kept his eyes scanning the surrounding area, searching for anything else out of place. He spoke little, offering only the necessary instructions to the patrol. He had a feeling that if he pushed too hard too soon, he'd be shut down. He needed to gather more information to build a case before confronting Jensen again. Once the body was loaded onto the sled and the patrol was securing the area, Ethan subtly began questioning the 2 men who had been first on the scene. He asked one of the patrol, a young guy named David. "Yeah, man, really rough. Poor kid, didn't have a chance." David avoided eye contact, busying himself with adjusting his gear. "Did you notice anything unusual when you arrived?" Ethan asked, phrasing the question carefully. "Anything that struck you as off?" David hesitated. The snow seemed kinda loose, I guess. Not like a normal slide. Also, the lines were already up when we got here, which is weird. Usually we're the ones who put them up." "You sure?" "Pretty sure," I remember thinking. "Who put those up? But figured someone beat us here." "Did you see anyone else around, before or after you arrived?" "Nah, nobody, just us," Ethan pressed. "Not even footprints. Tracks." David shrugged. "It was snowing, man. Everything filled in pretty quick." He asked the same questions to the other patrol member, a veteran named Sarah Miller. Her answers were similar, but she added one crucial detail. "I thought it was strange how quiet it was," she said, her voice low. No sounds of anyone skiing nearby. Even before the slide, it was eerie, like everyone had just vanished. Eerie. That was a good word for it. Ethan thanked them both, suppressing his growing unease. He needed to examine the scene more closely, to trust his instincts. He told Jensen he was going to do a perimeter check, ensuring no other skiers were at risk. Jensen waved him off with a dismissive gesture, more focused on coordinating the body's transport. Ethan walked away from the marked perimeter, circling the scene. The light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the snow. He stopped, turning his head, trying to see the slope from a different angle. He saw it then, a pattern, faint, almost imperceptible, carved into the snow just beyond the edge of the cordoned off area. Rows of shallow depressions, forming a geometric design. It was almost hidden beneath a thin layer of fresh snow, only revealed by the angle of the setting sun, which illuminated the subtle indentations. Delicate, precise, not random. He dropped to his knees, brushing away the snow with his gloved hand. The pattern became clearer, 14-hour series of interlocking triangles, repeating across the slope. It didn't resemble anything he'd ever seen. It wasn't a natural formation. It had been deliberately carved into the snow, and it wasn't meant to be seen. Under normal circumstances, you'd need the light to hit it just right to reveal the design. He pulled out his phone, snapping several pictures. As he reviewed the images on the screen, a shiver ran down his spine. He zoomed in on the pattern, tracing the lines with his finger. This wasn't a ski accident. This was a message, and he had a terrifying feeling. It was meant for him. The digital glow of the computer screen illuminated Ethan's cabin, a stark contrast to the blizzard raging outside. He'd been up for hours, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing sense of dread. The victim, identified as Daniel Harding, hadn't been a thrill-seeking college student. He'd been a financial analyst, a sharp one, employed by a firm specializing in forensic accounting, and according to his LinkedIn profile and a quick search of publicly available records, Harding had been quietly investigating some irregularities within the holdings of Summit Ridge Corp., the parent company that owned Park City Mountain Resort. Irregularities that involved offshore accounts and a complex web of shell corporations. Ethan ran Harding's name through a database of recent resort visitors, cross-referencing it with booking records and ski pass information. Harding hadn't been a guest at the resort. He'd arrived in Park City 2 days ago, registered at a small bed and breakfast in town, and purchased a day pass. He'd spent his time not on the slopes, but seemingly observing the resort from various vantage points. He'd been meticulous, discreet, like someone gathering evidence. He'd been digging too deep. A knock on the door startled him. He glanced at the clock, CB 2:17 a.m. He didn't, to receive visitors. He grabbed a flashlight, his hand instinctively reaching for the Glock 19 he kept locked in the bedside table. He tried to leave that life behind, but old habits died hard. He unlocked the door and peered out into the swirling snow. A petite woman stood on the porch, bundled in a heavy parka, her face flushed from the cold. He didn't recognize her. "Ethan Vance?" she asked, her voice slightly breathless. "Who is asking?" "Sarah Chen. I'm a journalist with the Park City Sentinel. I know it is late, but I need to talk to you." Ethan hesitated. Journalists were a necessary evil, but rarely helpful when you were trying to unravel a sensitive situation. He'd already given a statement to the resort's PR team, sticking to the official narrative of a tragic skiing accident. Adding fuel to the fire didn't seem wise. "I'm not sure I have anything to add," he said carefully. "I think you do. I've been following the reports about Daniel Harding's death, and frankly, something doesn't smell right." Sarah's eyes were sharp, intelligent. "She wasn't here for a fluff piece. I've been looking into Summit Ridge for a while now. They've got a reputation for aggressive business practices." He studied her for a moment, weighing his options. He'd sensed a genuine curiosity in her voice, a disdain for the carefully curated image. The resort projected maybe she could be an ally, or maybe she was another obstacle. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "But I can't promise I have any answers." The cabin was small, sparsely furnished. Sarah didn't comment on the modest surroundings, immediately getting down to business. She produced a folder filled with documents, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. "I started looking into Summit Ridge after a series of land acquisitions a few years back. They've been buying up properties around the base of the mountain, pushing out long-time residents. There is a pattern of intimidation, of using legal loopholes to get what they want." She laid out a map of the surrounding area, highlighting the properties Summit Ridge had recently acquired. It was a calculated expansion, strategically positioning the resort for future development. Harding was looking into the financing behind these acquisitions, she continued. He was tracing the money, trying to uncover who was really benefiting from all this. Ethan shared his observations from the scene, the discrepancies in the snowpack, the black safety lines, the deliberate pattern he'd discovered. Sarah listened intently, taking notes in a small, worn notebook. "The lines, that is definitely not standard procedure," she said. "And that pattern, that is strange, almost like a symbol." He showed her the photos he'd taken, the geometric design barely visible against the snow. Sarah examined them closely, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I haven't seen anything like this before, but it feels intentional, like someone's trying to send a message." They spent the next few hours piecing together the puzzle, sharing information, cautiously testing each other's trustworthiness. Sarah's research revealed Harding had been in contact with a whistleblower within Summit Ridge, someone who had leaked documents detailing questionable financial transactions. The whistleblower's identity was still unknown. "Harding was close to something," Sarah said, her voice grim. "And it looks like someone wanted to silence him." As they were talking, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a dispatch alert. Another incident. Snowboarder, male, mid-20s, injured near Devil's Elbow, possible broken leg, concussion. The message was brief, clinical. Ethan's stomach sank. Devil's Elbow, a notoriously challenging run known for its steep drops and icy patches, but it was also far removed from Ruth's Run, where Harding had died. Too far to be a coincidence. He glanced at Sarah. Another one. They raced to the scene, the snowmobile churning through the deepening drifts. The wind had picked up, howling like a banshee. When they arrived, the scene was eerily familiar. Another young man, lying in the snow, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The ski patrol was already on scene. This time, the snowpack did appear consistent, with a natural slide, but something felt off. The victim's injuries, the angle of the fall. It mirrored Harding's injuries almost exactly. And as Ethan scanned the area, he noticed something he'd missed at the first scene. Small, almost invisible scratches in the snow, forming the same geometric pattern he'd discovered at Ruth's Run. This pattern was more fragmented, obscured by the fresh snowfall, but it was undeniably there. He walked a short distance away from the scene, pulling out his map. He began to connect the dots, marking the locations of the two incidents. He drew a line between them. Then he added a third point, Sifi, the location of the resort's main lodge, another line, and another. As he continued to connect the points, a shape began to emerge, a large, complex polygon, encompassing a significant portion of the mountain. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the map. Sarah leaned in, her eyes widening in disbelief. "What is it?" I think these accidents aren't random. They're happening along the lines of this shape. Someone is deliberately marking the mountain." Sarah grabbed her laptop, accessing high-resolution maps of the resort. She overlaid the polygon onto the terrain, comparing it to the known geological features of the mountain. It is a geoglyph," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "A massive earthwork defined not by mounds or trenches, but by strategically placed accidents. It is insane, The implications were staggering. Someone was using the mountain and the lives of unsuspecting skiers and snowboarders to create a massive hidden message. But what was the message, and who was sending it? As they stared at the map, Ethan's phone rang again. It was Mark Jensen. "Vance, get back to the base. We need to talk, and bring Chen with you." His tone was icy, devoid of any pretense of cordiality. "What is going on, Mark?" Ethan asked, his hand tightening around the phone. "Just get here, Vance. Now." The clipped tone, the urgency in Jensen's voice, confirmed Ethan's worst fears. They were being watched, and they were getting too close to the truth. As they spun the snowmobile towards the base, Ethan was acutely aware of a sense of impending danger. They were no longer investigating an accident. They were walking into a trap. Reaching the resort's main office, they were ushered into Jensen's office, a stark room with panoramic views of the snow-covered slopes. Jensen stood by the window, his back to them, his face obscured by the shadows. At his side stood a man Ethan hadn't seen before, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, with a cold, calculating gaze. "This is Mr. Harding, legal counsel for Summit Ridge," Jensen said, gesturing towards the man in the suit. "He is here to discuss the recent incidents." Harding didn't offer a greeting. He simply stared at Ethan and Sarah, his eyes devoid of warmth. "We've been monitoring your activities," Harding said, his voice smooth and menacing. "And we're concerned about the questions you've been asking, especially regarding Mr. Harding's unfortunate demise." Sarah spoke first, her voice unwavering. "We have a right to know what is going on. 2 unexplained accidents in 2 days. That is not coincidence." Harding smiled, a chillingly artificial expression. "Coincidence is a powerful force, Ms. Chen. Sometimes things just happen, unfortunate tragedies." "We found a pattern," Ethan interjected, his voice low and firm. "A deliberate pattern. Someone is marking the mountain." Harding's smile vanished. "That is a fanciful notion, Mr. Vance, and frankly, it is damaging to the reputation of this resort." He turned to Jensen. "I suggest we take appropriate measures to contain this situation." As Harding spoke, Sarah discreetly pulled out her laptop, rapidly typing on the keyboard. She was searching for something, frantically running queries. "Just one moment," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I need to check something." A few seconds later, her face paled. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It is happening again." "What is it?" Ethan asked, his heart pounding in his chest. Sarah turned the laptop around, revealing a news article from 1998. The headline read, "Avalanche Claims 2 Lives at Black Mountain Resort." Black Mountain, another ski resort owned by Summit Ridge Corp. She scrolled down, reading aloud. "Authorities are investigating the deaths of 2 skiers who were caught in an avalanche near the summit of Black Mountain. The incident occurred in an area known for its unstable snowpack. However, some witnesses claim to have seen a strange pattern in the snow prior to the avalanche thieving. A series of geometric shapes carved into the mountaintop. Below the article was a faded photograph, a grainy image of the snow-covered summit. And there it was, the same unmistakable pattern, the same interlocking triangles, etched into the snow. The drive to Black Mountain felt like a descent into a forgotten grave. The resort, nestled in the remote Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, had been closed for over 2 decades, a skeletal silhouette against the grey winter sky. Summit Ridge had shuttered it abruptly after the avalanche, citing economic downturn and geological instability. Locals whispered about something far more sinister. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, the familiar tightness in his chest building with every mile. The parallels to his past were suffocating. 2 resorts, 2 tragedies, a shared pattern of inexplicable accidents. It felt like history was repeating itself. and he was powerless to stop it. Sarah, navigating, was unusually quiet, absorbed in the research she'd unearthed. The official investigation was a whitewash, she said, finally breaking the silence. The lead investigator had close ties to Summit Ridge's legal team. The avalanche was blamed on unpredictable weather conditions. No one looked into the rumors of foul play. They arrived at the ghost town that was Black Mountain. Buildings stood vacant, windows boarded up, the ski lifts frozen in mid-air like decaying metal dinosaurs. A single caretaker, a grizzled old man named Earl, maintained a minimal presence, mostly to deter vandals. Earl was initially reluctant to speak, his eyes clouded with suspicion. But after some coaxing and a generous offer of cash, he reluctantly shared his memories. Folks round here always said it wasn't no natural disaster, Earl rasped, his voice roughened by years of solitude and cheap whiskey. Old Man Hemlock, the mountain manager, he tried to warn them, said someone was tampering with the snow fences, weakening the snowpack. But Summit Ridge, they shut him up quick. Transferred him to some desk job in Florida. Never heard from him again. He confirmed the rumors of a strange pattern in the snow before the avalanche. Shapes, some kind of fancy geometry. Folks said it looked like something carved by giants. But the investigators, they dismissed it as just snowdrifts and shadows. They spent the day interviewing former employees, a retired ski instructor, a disgruntled lift operator, a former bartender. The stories were fragmented, laced with fear and uncertainty. But a common thread emerged, a sense that the official narrative didn't add up. People had seen strange activity on the mountain, suspicious individuals tampering with equipment, unusual patterns of snow removal, but no one had dared to speak out, fearing retribution from the powerful corporation. Ethan found himself increasingly haunted by his own failure. The images of the snow cave, the chilling silence, Sarah's face frozen in terror, flashed through his mind with relentless intensity. He found himself staring into the abyss of his guilt, the weight of his past threatening to crush him. He excused himself, walking away from Sarah and a particularly animated interview with the former lift operator. He needed air, needed space. He stumbled into the skeletal remains of the ski patrol shack, the air thick with the smell of decay and damp wood. He closed his eyes, trying to regulate his breathing. But the familiar panic surged within him, a cold wave washing over his body. His heart raced, his palms sweated, his vision blurred. The walls of the shack seemed to close in on him, suffocating him. He could almost hear the roar of the avalanche, the screams of the skiers, the cracking of the ice. He sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands. He couldn't let his past dictate his present. He needed to focus, to stay sharp, to protect Sarah. He forced himself to take deep, measured breaths, repeating a mantra he'd learned in therapy. Present moment. Safe now. Breathe. Slowly, painstakingly, he regained control, the panic receding like a tide. But the experience left him shaken, vulnerable. Rejoining Sarah, he found her talking to a frail, elderly man named Arthur Penhaligon. Penhaligon had been a structural engineer at Black Mountain Resort before its closure. He'd been responsible for assessing the mountain's geological stability. The pattern, Penhaligon said, his voice trembling with age. I remember studying the aerial photographs after the avalanche. The pattern. It wasn't random. It corresponded with the underlying geothermal activity of the mountain. He explained that Black Mountain sat atop a network of underground hot springs and fissures. The geometric pattern, he theorized, aligned with areas of weak rock formations, potential structural vulnerabilities. If someone were to deliberately trigger small slides in those areas, they could exacerbate the existing weaknesses, potentially causing a larger collapse, he said. It is a dangerous game, but theoretically possible. So, someone could be using the geothermal activity to destabilize the mountain, Sarah asked, her eyes widening with comprehension. Penhaligon nodded, It is a long shot, but it is the only explanation that makes sense. Summit Ridge always prioritized profit over safety. They pushed the development of the resort, despite my warnings about the geological risks. They wanted to expand, to build more luxury condos. They didn't care about the consequences. As they prepared to leave, Sarah discovered a note tucked under her windshield wiper. It was a single sheet of paper, crudely printed with block letters. "Stop digging. You're playing a dangerous game." The threat was blatant, chilling. Someone was watching them, monitoring their every move. "We need to be careful," Ethan said, his voice grim. "They know we're onto something." Back at the cabin, fueled by adrenaline and a growing sense of dread, Ethan decided to take a risk. Using his limited knowledge of network security, he gained unauthorized access to the resort's internal server. He bypassed the firewalls, navigated through layers of encrypted data, searching for any information that could shed light on the pattern of accidents. Hours later, he stumbled upon a hidden file, buried deep within the financial records. The file had been deliberately obscured, encrypted with a complex algorithm. But he managed to crack the code, revealing a series of confidential reports. The reports detailed projected revenue, increases contingent on managing certain liabilities that were explicitly identified as potential safety risks and negative public perception. The language was carefully crafted, euphemistic, but the meaning was clear. The reports outlined a strategy of deliberately minimizing safety precautions, suppressing negative reports, and manipulating snow conditions to control risk. They even included detailed projections of cost savings from avoiding costly mitigation measures. And chillingly, they referenced pattern optimization, two-tier process of strategically triggering small-scale incidents to divert attention from larger, more significant structural weaknesses. Ethan stared at the screen, his blood running cold. He'd found the smoking gun. Summit Ridge wasn't just negligent. They were actively orchestrating accidents, sacrificing lives to protect their profits. He copied the file onto a secure drive, knowing that this was evidence that could bring the corporation crashing down. But he also knew that possessing this information had made him a target. As he leaned back in his chair, exhausted but resolute, he noticed a faint flickering in the periphery of his vision. He turned his head, scanning the room. The cabin was dark, the only light emanating from the computer screen. But something was different. He felt a presence, a sense of being watched. Then he saw it, a shadow moving at the edge of the woods, barely visible through the swirling snow. A single, dark silhouette watching his cabin, and the feeling of dread intensified, promising that the game had just begun. Glass and steel of Summit Ridge, corporate headquarters, felt alien after the rough, hewn authenticity of Black Mountain. Ethan and Sarah, escorted by a stony-faced security detail, were led to the penthouse office of Richard Harding, CEO of Summit Ridge Corp. The view was a panoramic sweep of the valley, a beautiful vista masking a horrifying reality. Harding was everything Ethan expected: footy, impeccably tailored, radiating an aura of cold power, his eyes devoid of empathy. He listened to their accusations with an almost bored detachment, occasionally interrupting with a patronizing chuckle. "So, let me get this straight," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You're claiming that Summit Ridge intentionally caused 2 skiing accidents, fabricated a pattern of sabotage. This is absurd." Sarah laid out their evidence: BD, the discrepancies in the snow conditions, the unusual safety lines, Penhaligon's assessment of the geothermal instability, the hidden file detailing liability management. Harding dismissed it all as conjecture, speculation, and the ramblings of disgruntled employees. "Mr. Penhaligon is a senile old man," he said with a dismissive wave, "and that file is a preliminary cost-benefit analysis. We are a business. We assess risks. We manage assets. We do what is necessary to protect our shareholders. Ethan stepped forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. Necessary? You call sacrificing lives necessary? Harding's gaze hardened. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Let me give you some friendly advice, Mr. Vance. You've had a difficult past, a tragic accident. I understand grief can cloud judgment, but you're venturing into dangerous territory. I suggest you leave this alone. Pursue your obsession elsewhere. It wasn't a subtle threat. It was a warning, laced with the implied weight of the corporation's power. We're not intimidated, Sarah said, her voice unwavering. We're going to expose this, Harding smiled. A chillingly artificial expression. You have no proof, and even if you did, who would believe you? Summit Ridge is a pillar of this community. We employ thousands of people. We contribute millions to the local economy. Your accusations will be dismissed as the desperate attempt of two conspiracy theorists. As they argued, a subtle detail caught Ethan's eye. A large geological survey map displayed on the wall behind Harding. He focused on the area highlighted in red 15A section of the mountain, directly above the main ski village. The same section highlighted in the pattern optimization reports. What is going on with that section of the mountain? Ethan asked, pointing to the map. Harding hesitated for a split second, his composure cracking. We've discovered some unstable geological formations, a potential risk of landslides. We're planning a controlled demolition to mitigate the hazard. Controlled demolition. Her voice, laced with suspicion. That is what you're calling it. It looks an awful lot like you're deliberately triggering a collapse to collect the insurance money. Harding's face flushed with anger. That is a slanderous accusation. We are acting in the best interests of public safety. But his denial sounded hollow, unconvincing. Ethan realized the truth. Harding wasn't just exploiting the geothermal instability. He was creating a crisis to justify the demolition, maximizing his payout. The accidents weren't random. They were calculated steps in a larger, more elaborate scheme to defraud insurance companies and line his own pockets. Before they could press him further, the building lurched. A low rumble vibrated through the floor, followed by a series of alarms. Harding's security team immediately sprang into action, ushering him towards a secure exit. What is happening? Sarah demanded. It is happening, Ethan said, his voice grim. He is gone through with it. They rushed to the window, just in time to witness a horrifying spectacle unfolding on the mountainside. A massive avalanche, deliberately triggered by explosives planted along the destabilized slope, was roaring down the mountain, directly towards the ski village. It wasn't a natural event. It was a calculated act of destruction. He deliberately targeted the village. Sarah gasped, her face pale with shock. Hundreds of people. Chaos erupted. Skiers and snowboarders scrambled for safety. The ski village transformed into a scene of panic and confusion. The mountain rescue teams were overwhelmed, struggling to reach the buried and injured. Ethan, his training kicking in, immediately sprang into action. He grabbed a radio, contacting the resort's emergency dispatch. This is Vance. We have a catastrophic avalanche. Initiate a full-scale evacuation. I'm heading to the affected area. He and Sarah raced towards the base of the mountain, joining the desperate effort to rescue the victims. Ethan used his expertise to guide the search teams, identifying potential burial zones, coordinating the deployment of avalanche dogs, and providing critical medical assistance. Sarah, knowing the media would be crucial, commandeered the resort's communications center, overriding the carefully crafted PR messaging and broadcasting a plea for help to the outside world. She detailed Harding's fraudulent scheme, the deliberate manipulation of the mountain, the jeopardized lives. This wasn't an accident, she declared. Her voice broadcast over the resort's loudspeakers and streamed live online. This was a calculated act of greed. Richard Harding and Summit Ridge Corp are responsible for this disaster. The broadcast was quickly jammed by Harding's security team, but not before the message had reached countless viewers, sparking outrage and prompting an immediate investigation by federal authorities. As the rescue efforts continued, Ethan discovered something disturbing. He was reviewing the geological survey reports, again comparing them to real-time seismic data. Harding's plan wasn't as comprehensive as he thought. There was a critical underground fissure, a hidden weakness in the mountain's structure that Harding hadn't accounted for. The controlled demolition hadn't just triggered the avalanche, it had destabilized the fissure, creating a potential for a much larger, far more catastrophic collapse. If the fissure gave way, it could bring down a massive section of the mountain, burying the entire ski village and causing unimaginable devastation. He frantically alerted the rescue teams, urging them to evacuate the area immediately. But time was running out. The ground was trembling, the mountain groaning under immense stress. The fissure was on the verge of collapse. He spotted Sarah, struggling to maintain a stable signal on her radio, her face streaked with grime and exhaustion. He ran towards her, battling against the chaos and the falling snow. "Sarah, we need to get out of here," he shouted. "The fissure is about to give way." But as he reached her, he saw it, a sliver of movement at the edge of his vision, a figure standing on a nearby ridge, watching the destruction unfold. It was Harding. He wasn't concerned about the rescue efforts. He wasn't worried about the lives at stake. He was simply observing, a cold, calculating satisfaction on his face. Harding raised a small device to his ear, a remote detonator. Ethan realized with horror that Harding wasn't done yet. There was one final desperate act planned. The controller in Harding's hand would likely trigger a final blast, sealing the fate of the mountain. Ethan lunged for Harding, pushing through the panicked crowds, determined to stop him. But as he closed the distance, he caught sight of a small, almost imperceptible detail on the topographical map Harding held, a handwritten annotation scrawled beneath the fissure line. It wasn't a failed calculation, it was intentional. Harding knew about the fissure, and he was counting on it. The controlled demolition wasn't about safety or insurance money. It was about concealing something far more sinister, hidden within the mountain itself. The control center was a sterile bunker carved into the mountainside, the air thick with the smell of ozone and desperation. Harding, cornered but unrepentant, stood before a bank of monitors, his finger hovering over the detonator. "You don't understand," he said, his voice raspy with exertion. "This isn't about money. It is about control, about proving I can manipulate anything, anyone, to achieve my goals." "You're insane," Ethan spat, adrenaline surging through his veins. He'd fought his way through a gauntlet of security guards, his body aching, his breath ragged. "Insane? No, I'm a visionary," Harding sneered. "I saw the potential of this mountain, the value of the land, and I was willing to do whatever it took to unlock it." Ethan lunged forward, knocking the detonator from Harding's grasp. It clattered to the floor, but Harding was faster, stronger than he appeared. He tackled Ethan, sending them both crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. A brutal struggle ensued. Harding, fueled by desperation and a chilling sense of entitlement, fought with a ferocity that belied his age. Ethan, drawing on years of training and a simmering rage, countered with precision and controlled aggression. They grappled for control of the detonator, their hands locked in a desperate struggle. Ethan knew that if Harding succeeded, the entire section of the mountain would come down, burying the ski village under tons of rock and snow. The fissure, already strained to its breaking point, would give way. He remembered Penhaligon's words, the stresses and weaknesses of the mountain's geological structure. He focused on disrupting Harding's balance, using his weight to roll him onto his back. He pinned him, straddling his chest, and reached for the detonator. But Harding retaliated, driving a knee into Ethan's sternum, knocking the wind out of him. Ethan gasped, momentarily losing his grip. Harding seized the opportunity, scrambling to his feet and lunging for the control panel. He began frantically re-entering the detonation sequence, bypassing the safety protocols. The monitors flickered, displaying a countdown timer. "It is too late," Harding said, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "It is already initiated." Ethan, fighting through the pain, realized he couldn't override the system conventionally. The codes were too complex, the security too tight. He needed to think outside the box. He needed to exploit the mountain's inherent weaknesses. He remembered something Penhaligon had mentioned: Foudier series of emergency shut-off valves, located throughout the mountain, designed to release geothermal pressure in the event of a major seismic event. If he could access those valves, he could disrupt the energy flow to the detonators, effectively disabling them. "You think you've won?" Ethan rasped, buying himself precious seconds. "You haven't even begun to understand what you've unleashed." He kicked out, striking Harding in the side, sending him stumbling back. He then turned his attention to the emergency override panel, locating the access codes for the geothermal valve system. He input the sequence, his fingers flying across the keypad. Nothing happened. The countdown timer continued to tick down. He tried again, re-entering the code, double-checking for errors. Still nothing. Then he noticed a small, almost invisible switch hidden beneath the panel. It was a manual override, a fail-safe mechanism. He flipped the switch. A series of mechanical clanks echoed through the control center. The monitors flickered, then went dark. The countdown timer froze. The detonators were disabled. Harding stared in disbelief, his face contorted with rage. You ruined everything, Ethan." His body trembling with exhaustion, simply pointed to the monitors. "You were the one who ruined everything." Outside, the scene was one of devastation. The avalanche had carved a wide swathe of destruction through the ski village, burying buildings under tons of snow and debris. Rescue teams worked tirelessly, sifting through the wreckage, searching for survivors. The air was filled with the wail of sirens and the cries of the injured. Sarah, having secured the communication center, continued to broadcast the details of Harding's scheme, the evidence mounting with each passing minute. Her report, combined with evidence gathered by arriving federal investigators, quickly painted a damning picture of Harding's greed and recklessness. The media descended on Park City, turning the resort into a global spectacle. News crews from around the world flocked to the scene, broadcasting images of the devastation and interviewing survivors. The scandal threatened to engulf Summit Ridge Corp, sending its stock price plummeting. As the rescue efforts continued, Ethan, despite his exhaustion, joined the search teams, his knowledge of the mountain proving invaluable. He guided them through the debris fields, identifying potential burial zones and providing emergency medical assistance. He noticed a team of Forest Service personnel securing the demolition site, documenting the damage and assessing the stability of the remaining slopes. Something about their presence felt off. Their movements were too coordinated, too efficient. They weren't just investigating the incident, they were managing the aftermath, controlling the narrative. Driven by an uneasy feeling, Ethan approached the team's leader, a stern-faced woman named Agent Davies. He introduced himself and asked about their role in the investigation. Davies was initially dismissive, offering only terse, guarded answers. But Ethan pressed her, asking specifically about prior geological surveys of the mountain, any warnings about the fissure, any communication between Summit Ridge and the Forest Service regarding the demolition plans. Finally, Davies relented, revealing a disturbing truth. She produced a file containing a series of internal memos and email correspondence between Harding and a senior Forest Service official named Arthur Caldwell. Caldwell, it turned out, had been a long-time friend and business associate of Harding. He'd provided Harding with inside information about the mountain's geological structure, suppressed prior warnings about the unstable slopes, and facilitated the approval of the demolition plans. In exchange, Harding had promised Caldwell a lucrative stake in the insurance payout. Caldwell deliberately ignored multiple warnings about the fissure, Davies said, her voice tight with anger. He falsified reports and manipulated data to make the demolition appear safe. He was complicit in this disaster. The revelation sent a chill down Ethan's spine. It wasn't just Harding who was responsible. It was a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the Forest Service. He glanced towards the imposing bulk of the mountain, the scar of the avalanche, visible against the snow-covered slopes. The immediate crisis had been averted, but the truth was far more complex, far more sinister. The damage was done. Lives had been lost. A community had been shattered, and the forces that had orchestrated this tragedy were still at large, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the opportunity to strike again. The mountain still held secrets, with a sickening certainty that this was far from over. The legal fallout from the Park City disaster was swift and brutal. Richard Harding and Arthur Caldwell were indicted on multiple charges: sovereign fraud, conspiracy, manslaughter, and environmental crimes. The ensuing trial was a media circus, dominated by damning evidence of their reckless greed and callous disregard for human life. Sarah's exposé, published in a special edition of the Park City Sentinel, won her the prestigious Selden Ring Award for investigative journalism, catapulting her career to national prominence. Ethan, reluctantly thrust into the spotlight, testified before a congressional committee, detailing the events leading up to the avalanche and outlining the systemic failures that had allowed Harding and Caldwell to operate with impunity. He spoke with quiet intensity, his voice resonating with a hard-won wisdom. He didn't seek vengeance, he sought accountability. He advocated for stricter regulations, independent oversight of ski resort operations, and a renewed emphasis on safety over profit. "The mountains deserve our respect," he told the committee, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the assembled lawmakers. "They are not just playgrounds for the wealthy. They are vulnerable ecosystems, and the lives of those who venture into them are worth more than any quarterly earnings report." The testimony was cathartic, a final reckoning with the ghosts of his past. He found himself revisiting the ice cave less and less, the suffocating fear gradually replaced by a sense of acceptance. He began attending regular therapy sessions, working through his PTSD with a compassionate and skilled counselor. He started a volunteer program, offering avalanche safety training to local skiers and snowboarders. Teaching others, sharing his knowledge, allowed him to transform his trauma into something positive, a way to honor Sarah's memory and prevent future tragedies. He realized that running from the mountains hadn't healed him. Facing them, learning from his mistakes, had. The resort underwent a significant overhaul. Summit Ridge Corp was forced to pay out massive settlements to the victims and their families. New safety protocols were implemented, and independent auditors were brought in to monitor the resort's operations. The section of the mountain affected by the avalanche was closed permanently, transformed into a memorial park, a poignant reminder of the lives lost. Sarah, busy with her reporting and speaking engagements, remained a steadfast friend. They'd forged a bond of trust and mutual respect, a connection born from shared danger and a common desire for justice. She often visited him at his cabin, sharing updates on her investigations and offering a comforting ear. "They're still digging up dirt," she told him one evening, months after the trial had concluded. "There are whispers about other shady deals Summit Ridge has been involved in, other corners they've cut." Harding and Caldwell weren't working alone. Ethan nodded, his intuition telling him she was right. The scope of the conspiracy likely extended far beyond the immediate players. But for now, he needed to focus on his own healing, on rebuilding his life. He returned to his role as a mountain rescuer, accepting the challenges and the risks with a renewed sense of purpose. He patrolled the slopes regularly, his eyes scanning the terrain, his mind attuned to the subtle shifts in the snowpack. He wasn't driven by guilt anymore. He was driven by a desire to protect others, to prevent another tragedy. He found a measure of peace in the solitude of the mountains, in the rhythm of the seasons, in the quiet beauty of the winter landscape. He allowed himself to enjoy the simple things. Sudi, a hot cup of coffee on a cold morning, the crunch of snow beneath his skis, the camaraderie of his fellow rescuers. One crisp afternoon toward the end of the ski season, Ethan was conducting a routine patrol near the memorial park. The sun was sinking below the horizon, casting long, ethereal shadows across the snow. He stopped at a vantage point overlooking the valley, taking a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. He noticed something unusual in the snow below. A set of tracks, distinct from those of skiers or snowboarders. They were narrow, deliberate, and followed a peculiar pattern, looping and curving in a way that felt intentional. The tracks led away from the memorial park and disappeared into the dense forest. He skied down to investigate, his heart quickening with a familiar sense of unease. The tracks weren't fresh, but they were relatively recent, perhaps a day or two old. They didn't appear to be made by animals. They were too precise, too purposeful. He knelt down, examining the tracks closely. They resembled nothing he'd ever seen. They weren't the markings of hikers or snowshoers. They were something else, something unsettling. A flicker of recognition crossed his mind, a faint echo of the geometric pattern he'd discovered on the mountainside before the avalanche. But this wasn't the same pattern. It was a variation, a slightly altered design. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the surrounding landscape. The mountains stood silent and majestic, guarding their secrets. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The sense of closure he'd begun to experience was abruptly shattered. The past, he realized, wasn't quite finished with him. Someone else knew more than they were letting on, and that someone was still out there, hidden in the shadows, leaving their subtle but ominous mark on the snow. The mountains had yielded a measure of peace, but also a lingering question, a chilling premonition that the echoes of the past were far from silent.